Every single RPG campaign or story has a setting, whether it's a medieval fantasy world, a modern-day city, or the far reaches of space. A well-crafted world can transport readers and players to a place of magic and awe, igniting their imaginations, while a poorly crafted one can leave them disinterested. But what makes a setting feel genuinely immersive? Is it the word choice, how it's presented, or something completely different? Let's find out. Roll up your sleeves, tighten your belts, put on your thinking caps, because today, I'm going to give you some potent tools you can use in crafting realistic, evocative locations and environments for your stories and campaigns. The most immersive settings start with detailed world building. Now, I'm not saying to flesh out every day of the world from start to finish or know every person in your world like the back of your hand. I mean paying attention to the details such as the geography, the history of locations, the beliefs of certain people, the mythologies of the world as a whole, and of individual cultures. A writer with even an average understanding of these elements can turn a dull and bland world into one that feels authentic, even if it's filled with magic and mythical creatures such as dragons and demogorgons. Your setting should be more than just a backdrop for your story to take place. It should help aid the characters and the story as a whole. For example, if your campaign revolves around a grand quest to retrieve some mythical item of legend, the setting should be created in a way that makes that quest feel challenging and exciting. How does the setting affect your characters' decisions or motivations? What about their personalities or the actions that they're prone to taking? How do their actions affect the setting, and how does that same setting affect their actions? A party of adventurers is far less likely to attempt a heist on a heavily guarded military outpost than they are on a jewelry store or a bank vault. When creating your world, there are a few core elements you'll want to keep in mind. First, consider the physical characteristics of the world. What is the terrain like? Are there different types of terrain throughout the world? Does the world have multiple continents, or is it one giant Pangea-type landmass? What is the climate in different parts of the world, and does the climate affect the types of structures within that area? These details, when kept consistent, will assist your readers or players in better visualizing the world that you have fabricated. The second element you'll want to remember to think about is the cultures and societies within your world. What languages might they speak, or what religions are practiced or maybe even outlawed in certain regions of the world? What types of governments are in place, and does that affect the quality of life for the people of that country or kingdom? How might the climate affect the cultures within them? Did the geography of their home influence their religion or their mythology? These bits of knowledge help to build depth and complexity into the world and make it feel more real. The next element you need to consider is the history of your world. What are some of the big historical events that changed the shape of it into what it is now? Were there any major conflicts or wars throughout the history, and what kind of impact did they have? Understanding the history of your world allows you to give your readers and players a deep, rich backstory when the opportunity arises, and will hopefully compel your readers or players to want to learn more about the story and the world as a whole. This fourth and final element is geared more towards story writing rather than RPG campaign writing, but is useful to know and understand nonetheless. Consider the magic system you're implementing in your world. Is it based on learned spells and incantation, or is it more innate and natural? How does the system work? What limitations are there? How difficult is it to learn if a person can learn it at all? The magic system in your world can make or break the immersion. A well-designed magic system can add a lot of intrigue and wonder to the story, while a poorly designed system can leave the reader disconnected and upset at the lack of consistency and planning. These elements aren't meant to stand alone. They're meant to be combined and used in tandem with one another. Geography and climate tie in with culture and beliefs, which can be tied to the magic system or the history of a people or location. A myth of the gods slinging fire and rocks at one another and into the ground might have actually been a volcano exploding. The god of the sea wiping out an entire coastal town in a giant tidal wave may have simply been a wave created by an earthquake in the middle of the ocean somewhere. All of these elements tie to one another, and when done properly will allow you to create a world where your reader or players feel transported to. Being able to describe things well is essential to creating a rich and intricate world that feels realistic and believable. It's also a fundamental tool for any writer looking to immerse their reader in a fantasy or RPG setting. The trick with being descriptive, however, is to use it effectively so it doesn't feel overwhelming or tiresome to your readers and players. One way to more effectively utilize description is to work it into the actions of the story. An example of this is, instead of simply describing a bridge as old, ragged, and sketchy, consider having your main character or your players cross the bridge and explain how the bridge sways from side to side as they step, or if pieces fall from under their feet. Does the bridge struggle under their weight? What sounds does it give off? Description can also be used to convey emotions or the atmosphere of an environment. For instance, describing a forest as dark and spooky doesn't really do much to create a sense of terror, unease, or suspense for your readers and players. On the other hand, describing the way that the trees loom overhead, blocking out any remnants of moonlight and surrounding your players or protagonist in pitch black creates that sense of unease or danger you're trying to convey. Mention how the air feels thick and muggy, and how that the only sound is that of their ragged breath. These details and one similar will help to create a sense of foreboding and danger that will draw your readers and players deeper into your story. An integral part of world building in fantasy and RPG settings is the creation of both tension and conflict. Think of any fantasy or adventure story you can. How does it start off? I can almost guarantee it starts with something happening to upset the daily life of the protagonist. That is because without these elements, the story you're trying to tell may fall flat, causing readers and players alike to lose interest. To generate conflict and tension, it helps to begin by identifying key issues and themes within your story. Once you've done that, you can start to develop the different political and social structures of the world, including the distribution of power, the relationships of different factions of people, and any other ongoing conflicts between your groups. This development can happen on both the large and small scale, from the smallest of villages to the largest of kingdoms. Another way to facilitate conflict and tension is the development of unique and complex characters who have their own goals, their own motivations, and so forth. These characters have the possibility of clashing with one another or with the world as a whole, creating natural tension and conflict, meaning your players or protagonist was not the cause of the conflict. The key to using world building to create conflict and tension is to ensure that the world that you built is rich, multi-layered, diverse, and full of potential conflicts. By doing this, you create a setting that is engaging and filled with the opportunities for exciting storytelling, especially if your party decides to take things in a direction that you weren't expecting. Creating a world that feels real can be an extremely fun and exciting process, but it's easy to stumble along the way and succumb to some common yet tragic pitfalls. The biggest one is having too much focus on world building. While yes, it's important, it isn't the only aspect of writing fantasy or RPG stories. Make sure that you don't spend so much time on world building that you end up neglecting the other important elements such as character development or, the plot. The second one is over-explaining. While it's important to establish the rules and limitations of your world, it is just as, if not more important, to not over-explain every minute detail. Leave some aspects intentionally vague and let your players and readers use their imaginations to interpret different things and come up with fun theories about how everything ties together. The third is lack of consistency. I know it's cliche, but consistency truly is key when it comes to immersive world building. Ensure that the rules and limitations you laid out don't contradict themselves. Make sure that if the characters return to a location that they've been to before, that the residents are the same, that the shops and inns are the same, etc. If you take nothing else away from this video, I want you to remember consistency is key. The last one I'm going to talk about today is lack of originality. While it's extremely easy to borrow inspiration from books, shows, and movies, it's important to not borrow too heavily from them and basically copy-paste them. Focus on creating a world that is unique and original, and don't be afraid to take risks and try new things or push the boundaries of what has been done before. The beauty of fantasy and RPG writing is that you get to create worlds that are truly one of a kind and unlike anything else. With a bit of creativity and a lot of hard work, you can create a world of wonder that will captivate your audience and leave them wanting more.